we're saying Merry Christmas again.
It is officially my favorite time of year. It's the Christmas season, and specifically for those of you who don't live in the United States, this is when us liberals team up and we launch an all-out assault on the holiday. At least that's what Fox News and Republicans want you to think, but in actuality, we're celebrating just like everyone else. I mean, I've got the hat, I've got my ugly Christmas sweater, and I've got the tree just for this segment. But nonetheless, Fox News has been sounding the alarms for years now about how liberals want to ruin Christmas. The evidence being that liberals think people should maybe say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, or that Starbucks changed the color of their cups to red. And this year, to no one's surprise, it's absolutely no different. So this time, we're going to hear from Coke sellout Dave Rubin, who's going to join the chorus of idiocy by going on Tucker Carlson's show on Fox News and discussing how libs are ruining Rudolph now. Even Rudolph. Is nothing sacred?
Dave, as I'm watching that, all of a sudden I had this kind of panic feeling, thinking maybe I fell for an elaborate, ironic prank from HuffPo, and then I realized no, because they don't have a sense of humor. I mean, but reassure me, This is real, right?
Tucker, very quickly on the last segment, I swear to you, I thought you were the highest paid man in television. I am shocked, and I'm gonna, I don't get paid for these appearances, but I am going to mail you a check for somewhere between $15 and $20. Okay, that aside,
I appreciate that, Dave.
This is, you got it, my friend. Listen, these puff piece of Huffington Post. I mean, look, these pieces that these authors, whatever they are, journalists that they write. These are not pieces of journalism. It's so much easier to destroy than to create. If you're watching Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and think it's about racism and misogyny and the patriarchy and the rest of it, well, you can find that stuff everywhere. If you look back at anything, and that's what people really need to understand when these pieces come out, and then you start looking at something that you used to love or that used to have a wonderful message about the holiday and giving and being accepted and all of those things, that they're trying to take that away from you. And it's not like they stop with one thing, right? They find something, they kind of destroy that, and they'll move on to everything else that we love. So, eventually they'll move on to sitcoms that we love, whether it's Seinfeld for, doing something they've done, or Friends or whatever else it is. They'll go for cartoons. They've gone for Bugs Bunny. I mean, they will literally go for a sunset. Think of whoever's watching this right now, think of something you love that brings you a sense of peace and decency, and they will somehow link it to the patriarchy and the rest of their politically correct nonsense. And we need to realize that, as I said earlier, it's easier to destroy than create.
Well,
and
that's
what
the
they're
smartest.
just going to keep doing. And I think what we have to do is create.
That's such a smart point. What are we creating? What is being created in this moment of destruction right now? Do you make me feel better?
Well, that's what I'm worried about. Yeah, well, that's what I'm worried about, because there is some legitimacy that some of the things happening in the country and in the world should be destroyed at some level. Look, we've got major problems in academia. We've got major problems in the media. We want some change. I agree. Absolutely. So we want some change, but anyone can burn anything down. And the question is, we've put up so much goodness in the world. The United States and Western world has put up so much goodness related to freedom. We live in the freest country ever. We can do whatever we want in this country. And if your job all day long is to write pieces that actually destroy the stories that we're built on, and then don't offer an alternative. I mean, that's the thing. They never offer an alternative. Or if they do, it usually is about power to the state, which is actually dystopian, not utopian. So that's what we have to watch out for. And, it's unfortunate because they write these things, and then, guys like us, we feel like we have to respond to them because we don't want people being brainwashed. But I'm glad that we did, because you just issued a challenge, I think, to the rest of us, which is create. We need to create more. Let's create, man. Let's create.
So just watching that, you might instinctively feel as if what you just saw was nothing more than stupidity in action and being broadcasted to millions of Americans, but it gets dumber as you get more of the context. I assure you of that. Now, what's great is that the notion that elements of this cartoon could somehow be problematic was so absurd to Tucker that he was worried that he was somehow being duped by, quote, an elaborate or ironic prank from HuffPost, until he realized that couldn't be the case because, quote, they don't have a sense of humor. Well, we're going to see why he's wrong about that in a minute, because the actual article they're talking about was not meant to be taken seriously. In fact, it wasn't even an article or an editorial at all, so he's wrong. But I want to get to what Dave Rubin says here, because he really makes this argument that nothing really is sacred anymore to these goddamn liberals. They're going to ruin everything. They're going to look for misogyny and homophobia and white supremacy where it doesn't even exist. I mean, something as benign as a cartoon can't possibly be problematic, can it? If you look back at cartoons from the early 1900s, they were pretty problematic, to say the least. So of course we can look back as we progress as a society and see that maybe some things weren't as great as we once thought they were. I mean, if you watch a bunch of comedies from the mid-2000s, some of them were incredibly homophobic. It's just that they passed it off as comedy, so nobody really noticed. But I mean, we're just becoming a little bit more cognizant of these things because culture has changed. Pointing that out doesn't make me an overly politically correct SJW. It just makes me an observer of a society that is continuously evolving, both socially and culturally. I mean, these norms are changing, and they're changing significantly pretty rapidly, because that's what happens when you live in a modern society. And guess what? I'm glad that norms change. Dave Rubin should be really thankful that norms and societal values change, given that he is a gay man who will remind you about that every 5 minutes. But the underlying implication is that liberals, in criticizing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, they're somehow trying to take that away from you. They want to get it banned from television, but that's not correct at all. It's just that political norms, social norms, cultural norms evolve. That's it, and they're just pointing it out. They're saying, oh wow, maybe Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the characters in that show, were a little bit more assholish than I originally remembered. And that's essentially what they were saying. But more on what Dave Rubin says here. He adds, I mean, they will literally go for sunset. Think for whoever's watching this now. Think of something you love that brings you a sense of peace and decency, and they will somehow link it to the patriarchy and the rest of their politically correct nonsense, and we need to realize it's easier to destroy than create. So I want you conservatives watching Fox News right now to close your eyes. Think about something that's precious to you, something that you hold the most dear in your heart. Now, also imagine a liberal. Imagine them coming in and destroying that thing you hold most dear to your heart. I mean, Dave, if you're going to try to fearmonger about the opposition, you've got to be at least a little bit more reasonable and more subtle in your demonization. Otherwise, you're going to come off as a hack, and that's exactly what you came off as. He's not even trying to be a good propagandist here. He's just saying liberals basically hate everything you like, and that's why you should be against liberals. I mean, you've got to try harder than that. How are you going to actually convince people that they should hate liberals if you're not even giving them a valid reason? I mean, sunset, Dave? You think we're against sunset? What a fucking dumbass. Look, Dave... This is so stupid. I mean, I knew that the War on Christmas controversy was inevitable. You know, the minute, December rolled around, I was just waiting. And they're getting dumber each year. I thought that the Starbucks cup controversy was probably the lowest of the low in terms of how stupid political discourse gets with regard to the supposed War on Christmas. But this is definitely something that is dumber. And it gets dumber when you actually know about the article they're talking about. So the question really is, what did this Huffington Post editor say about Rudolph that got Dave Rubin's panties in a bunch? Because Dave Rubin implied throughout this segment multiple times that this editor was trying to promote the idea that Rudolph was bad. Well, let's actually look at the article. If you go to the comedy section of Huffington Post, you'll find the article in question is titled, "Viewers Noticed Some Very Disturbing Details in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer," where the author doesn't necessarily editorialize, but instead shares tweets about the cartoon that he found humorous. So he saw that Rudolph was trending, he looked on Twitter at some of these tweets, and he shared the tweets that he found funny. In fact, he actually states, quote, "Some people joked that they noticed a few things in the Christmas classic that they didn't always spot or simply ignored when they saw it years ago. Here are some of those humorous observations. I will never not tweet this when Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is trending. Roses are red, elf practice is avoidable, deviation from the norm will be punished unless it's exploitable. Watching Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the moral of the story I've learned since watching it as a kid, people are dicks until they need something from you. My saddest takeaway from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is how mean and dismissive Santa is. Really, Santa? Nothing says holiday spirit quite like dissecting Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and realizing almost everyone is an ass. Comet legit encouraged bullying and exclusion. I can even buy into his father being terrible, but Santa? That's messed up. Hashtag Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. So this is what all of the commotion was about. Dave Rubin and Tucker Carlson were responding to outrage over this article when it was nothing more than the author sharing funny tweets about Rudolph from people who were making fun of the cartoon. And it wasn't just that these were all political tweets. The author even shared some apolitical tweets. For example, somebody said they refused to Google Burl Ives because they don't want to know what he actually looks like because that would ruin their image of him as the snowman. It also included a tweet from someone who poked fun at liberals, saying that Yukon Cornelius was the first hipster. But because some people pointed out how mean the characters were, how misogynistic Rudolph's dad was, and how Rudolph was being bullied, that was enough for Tucker Carlson and Dave Rubin to get together to deem these tweets controversy and put out this idiotic segment about how SJWs ruin everything, and now they're coming after your beloved Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer cartoons. Now, I'm not even 100% sure if Dave Rubin entirely understood what it was that liberals were supposedly offended by, because most of the outrage I've seen came from a tweet HuffPost made where they shared a video of the cartoon and they said the holiday TV classic Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is seriously problematic. Now, you'd think, based on what they tweeted there, that this was the source for all of the outrage, but really, all they did was do more of what the article I showed you did. Share more tweets from people. And they don't even necessarily criticize the cartoon as a whole for being politically incorrect or anything like that. They just simply go on to say what we all kind of thought when we watched it again, that the characters were a lot shittier than we may have remembered as children. So it was kind of a narrative criticism. It was a critique of the characters, not the cartoon as a whole. And there were some specific examples that they pointed out, like how Clarice's dad was bigoted towards Rudolph because he didn't want his daughter to be seen in public with a reindeer with a red nose, and some people speculated about whether or not this was a parable for racism and interracial dating, which honestly doesn't seem too far off to me. But the reason why I question whether or not Dave Rubin understood why liberals were supposedly offended is because he kept referencing the author and implied that this was a written article that they were responding to that was trying to gin up outrage, when in actuality, as I stated, most conservatives were responding to a tweet from HuffPost, and Tucker even played the video that HuffPost tweeted out alongside them for the entirety of their discussion. So either Dave Rubin actually did take issue with the article I read to you that was in the comedy section of HuffPost, or he didn't even know that they were supposed to be talking about the video that was posted to HuffPost's Twitter account, and he decided to just utilize the generic right-wing talking points he typically uses when discussing issues of this nature, and he brought up political correctness, the outrage machine, and what have you. Regardless, he didn't even respond to a specific example of supposed outrage, which leads me to believe he's just jumping on the bandwagon here when he clearly doesn't feel passionate or give a shit about this issue at all. And understand the irony here. They're the ones who are saying liberals look for controversy in everything, but here they are looking for controversy where there was none to be found. And their agenda is crystal clear. They're doing everything they can to find examples of liberal outrage so they can prop up that great SJW boogeyman and claim that it's an existential threat to mankind. That's what they're trying to do. Meanwhile, their side, the side they do propaganda for, actually does pose a real existential threat to mankind. Donald Trump and the Republican Party, who get paid to deny climate science. That's the real threat. But what they want you to think is that these SJWs, they ruin everything and now they're trying to ruin Rudolph. Well, nobody here is saying that Rudolph should be banned. These people are saying, well, Rudolph is a little bit different than how I remembered it. There's a little bit more dickheadedness from the characters. There's some misogyny from Rudolph's dad. And it's not how I remembered it. Casually pointing this out is not controversy. But Fox News, in the way that they claim we always do, they try to look for controversy because them talking about the supposed outrage machine, not only is that part of the outrage machine that they denounce, but it's them propping up their side, saying, look, Republicans care about the issues, liberals care about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Aren't they silly? Let's bring on Dave Rubin to talk about how liberals are going to be against Sunset. They see misogyny and patriarchy in Sunset. Yeah, we see controversy everywhere, even where it's not. It's like we're looking for it. It's almost as if you're looking for it, Dave Rubin and Tucker Carlson. I'm sure the irony went right over their heads.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.